So today we're interviewing the State Senator of District 29 of California, Josh Newman, and Public Policy Associate for Crystal Stairs Incorporated, Justin Blakely. Our conversation will mainly revolve around Assembly Bill 1649, also known as the Child Care and Development Services Act, which was introduced by Assemblymember Sharon Quirk-Silva earlier this year in January. So let's first start with a brief introduction. So we'll start with you and then move on to Senator Newman.
Yeah, thank you. Excited to be here. My name is Justin Blakely. I'm the Public Policy Associate for Crystal Stairs, also LA County Commissioner for the Policy Roundtable for Child Care and Development. Really excited to be here. This bill is very important. Really glad to have the Senator here as well to discuss it. And we're really recognizing that there's a great need to address long-term issues and actually fund them long-term solutions right now here in the state of California. So excited.
And I'm State Senator Josh Newman, represent this area, and today I'm actually standing in for Sharon Quirk-Silva, who's actually the Assembly author of AB 1649. But this bill, and we'll get into it, is really important to level the playing field, ensure that working people, working families, especially working moms, have predictable access to childcare, because that is the pandemic has proven that can be the difference between being able to work and a family to meet its needs or not. And so this is a very important bill to make sure that continues to be the case.
Mm-hmm. So let's actually first get started with what is AB 1649, and what does it do for families in California?
Yeah, I'll also go ahead and start off the conversation. What AB 1649 does is it essentially addresses the need for the poorest and most low-income families to be able to return back to the workforce. If you look at it this way, our families in the pandemic, and also once they as we try to return back into the workforce, there's an essential need for childcare. There's the 9 to 5 traditional, able to work in those settings parent. And then there's also those who work the untraditional hours, the 5 to 9, for example. And essentially this, as the Senator even said, levels out the playing field. It provides equity that not only is the 9 to 5 traditional working family able to take their child to a high quality, affordable child care provider, but also that 5 to 9 non-traditional parent family can take their child into a child care facility, a family child care home, and still get that high quality, affordable child care.
Mm-hmm. And let me just add, the other side of this is at the child care level. And so, child care is, in the best of times, a challenging business. And for the most part, it's delivered by entrepreneurs, mostly women, often out of their homes, and so also important to remember that it's very explicitly regulated in California. So because of that, these are hard businesses to make work in the best of times. But in a time of real uncertainty, with where a child care provider doesn't know whether or not they can count on parents to be able to afford, especially if they're working, not working, to afford predictably to have their kids in childcare, it creates really intense pressures on their businesses. And so that's one of the issues that 1649 addresses. We need to provide stability and predictability for those businesses so they will be there for working families when they have to, so they have a place to safely and sort of and a nurturing place for their kids so they can continue working.
Right. And I think these are some great goals that we're setting, but how does that break down for one specific family? Could you explain how that voucher month by month would work?
Yeah, so essentially, if you take, I kind of talked about it earlier, the 9 to 5 traditional working family, and then you get the 5 to 9. I'll kind of break it down this way. Let's, like I said, let's take a 2 single mom head of household. They're both, working a hard-paying California minimum wage job at $15 an hour. The mom who has a guaranteed set number of hours of 9 to 5 gets a subsidized child care voucher, let's say of $600. The other mom has a job as a waitress where her job work hours are unstable. They're, again, how I talked about that 5 to 9, and say her voucher is $602. But for her case, the 5 to 9, the waitress, mother would not be able to get childcare unless she worked, or the child gets sick. It would not be able to get paid for. So essentially, what AB 1649 is doing is addressing that if the parent, whether they're 9 to 5, in those traditional working hours, or a 5 to 9, a waitress who maybe have unstable working hours, as long as they meet the income eligibility, excuse me, it's early for the tongue twisters, eligibility documentation, they're all guaranteed high quality, affordable childcare. And that's really what this is talking about, in addition to the need for addressing the need for a stability to come for the ECE workforce, childcare providers, some mass exodus of them leaving the workforce. So this is another way to kind of be able to solve that equity gap that's disproportionately affecting women of color returning to work, and also the women of color that make up the childcare provider industry.
All right, thank you for explaining that. So how will this bill kind of, in the legislative sense, address disparities in the current system?
So what this bill will do, what this bill does is it picks up where a governor's executive order left off. So the governor, during the pandemic, we as a state recognized that this was one of the key obstacles to working families, especially women of color, continue to participate in the workforce during a very challenging time, right? Because if you don't have a place to safely place your kids, you cannot work. And if you're on the other side of the equation, if you're the child care provider, and you don't have the certainty of payment, it's hard to run that business, particularly while maintaining the necessary ratios around care. So what this bill will do is the governor's executive order will sunset on June 30th. This will continue to provide the subsidy amounts. And what's interesting is there's actually a bunch of money left over that's not been spent. So this provides a legal basis for spending those unspent monies and make sure that these vouchers get to the women and families that really need them.
Right. So what happens if it doesn't pass on June 30th?
We will be back to, unfortunately, where we would have been in the absence of the governor's executive order, which is, and what we're seeing in any event, which is you're seeing, as Justin mentioned, real instability in the child care marketplace. That creates a sort of a negative spiral where, fewer child care providers, fewer opportunities for people to, for care for their kids, fewer opportunities to work, less income for the people who would otherwise pay these providers. We're trying to reverse that cycle and make it go in a positive direction.
Right. So we're definitely time sensitive on this bill.
Yeah. And I want to add one more thing, and it's easy. Right now, right? It's May 14th, and it can feel to many of us like the pandemic is subsiding, right? For the most part, the worst parts are over. But it's really important to remember that the pandemic, there were two pandemics. There was a pandemic for the top half of the wage scale. Many of us left largely unscathed. At the bottom half of the wage scale, where frontline workers work, where working families who are most challenged around all the pressures in California, that economic crisis, whether or not we're wearing masks or not, continues. And it's really important to recognize that. It will be several years before we work our way out of this. And it's really important to make sure that we give California workers, especially women and single heads of families, opportunities to continue working to dig their way out of this crisis.
Alrighty, so my next question is, childcare in California, is it, before this bill, is it provided by the California government, or does it work with nonprofits and private businesses entirely?
Right. So California subsidized childcare system is really funded by monies from the federal and state government. Before COVID, during COVID, I should say, a lot of the childcare was funded by or funded for supporting local critical essential workers. So not only our healthcare workers, but our frontline staff at our grocery stores. We know everybody, the first responders. Excuse me. And so essentially, we also had that was funded through the federal CARES dollars. And what that showed us is that if childcare was not, operating at its full function as it was, a lot of our frontline essential workers will not be able to return to work and would not been able to keep California's economy moving through the pandemic. And it really illuminated the fact that, we have California's to work program, CalWorks, which is the vouchers from the AB49 is focused on predetermined, a part of California's annual budget process. So this money is already here. In this process, the line item is determined by how many slots are in California. So we know that the governor is going to be able to pay the 36,000 child care subsidized slots. So this essentially is going to be able to pay for those slots. It's going to be able to keep those providers with a guaranteed understanding that they are going to get, if they're a child care facility that can house 14, they are guaranteed to make sure that they will get reimbursed for those 14 slots as long as the child care slot is filled. So that's what this bill is really doing, and it's based off of that voucher system.
Right, and both of you have mentioned that, there have been 2 pandemics, right? Some people have just been disproportionately impacted by it. And we've also talked about how some people just don't have regular hours. They have jobs that don't allow for that. So those families in particular, how would this change other aspects of their life? Like, how would this change their economic standing? How would this change their recovery from the pandemic?
So to Justin's point, the state doesn't subsidize, does not pay for child care directly. And, so we try to let the market kind of operate as markets should. But to his point, you've got a large number of small providers. They have to conform to state regulations, and so they can only maintain as many slots as they can predictably pay for. And what the alternative payment systems do for eligible families is make sure that money goes directly to the child care providers. What this bill does is ensure stability and predictability for those providers. So if you think of it this way, so if you're a restaurant, right, and you take reservations and people continually don't show up for those reservations, you're going to lose money. You're going to buy food. You're going to staff for it. And something similar has happened in the child care industry. And so the consequences of that are quite severe, right? They have this kind of, spiraling impact. And so all this says is, I have a 6-year-old and she goes to daycare after school, and we pay on a weekly basis. And because of that, the private daycare facility we go to can make staffing decisions, can make investments, and can also has the assurance they can cover all of their normal fixed costs. A child care provider serving working families, in the absence of this certainty, does not have that assurance. And because of that, they're in a very precarious state, both for their business, but just as importantly for the working people who need that child care.
Yeah, and I'll even bring it to something even more at home that's even localized in LA County. For example, I was talking to a child care provider who's been in the game for, I would say, about 30 years at least. And she told me during the pandemic that essentially she did not know who would be returning back the next day, meaning, whether it was from the mother, most times, being sent home because she maybe contracted the COVID-19, and then you have the child who maybe caught something and has to now go home, which means the mother then has to stay home with the child. So, it's all these different things, and that has an adverse effect on the child care provider, who's not only not getting paid a salary for their work that they're doing, not having essential benefits, very basic need healthcare benefits. They don't take vacation. They really have the food insecurity and the housing insecurity that many working families also have. They are part of that population. And essentially, if they do not have something that AB 1649 is doing, we will continue to see poverty continue to cycle in the those who are already at the bottom of the economic status that our communities are faced with. They will continue to go down and sink further in, and it will be much more difficult to pull them out. And so that's why equity is a great lens that we need to continue to move forward in California policy when addressing inequities in the early care and education system.
And I would just add to that, not only does this have an equity benefit, it has a broader economic benefit, right? And so, the more we can keep people working, the more we can keep children in daycare, the less we as a state have to cover all of those shortfalls, right? Rent arrearages, utility arrearages, unemployment. And so over the longer span, and this is why this is important as a larger strategy for making sure that our child care system is properly balanced and funded, this is the avenue for working people. If you can't work, right, for whatever reason, but the irony is, you have kids, you want nothing but the best for those kids, and you have sort of a technical reason why we can't fund the daycare that would otherwise, provide a stable, nurturing place for those kids. It's really, over the long haul, short-sighted, right? Because we're going to lose the benefit of all this amazing talent in our workforce simply because they're working moms. And that's not fair, and it also has a detrimental impact on their kids over time.
Right. So we're trying to fix detrimental effects of this problem in the long term.
And this is as Justin mentioned, this is a broader systemic problem. This is but one element in that problem. But the need is particularly clear right now. I think the governor gets credit for addressing this problem during the pandemic through an executive order. This bill is necessary and really valuable for doing exactly that, for solving two problems at once, right? Providing access to daycare for working parents, but also making sure that the child care provider market doesn't die, right, in California, doesn't suffer, permanent damage, so that when we're out of the pandemic, we need these providers, especially, the small neighborhood home-based providers. We need them to be invested and viable so that they will then be able to do what they do well.
Absolutely. So, how long do you think it would take to see the effects of this bill once it is passed, once we're out of the pandemic?
I see the effects of this bill being implemented. I see immediate change.
Right.
You see that, the provider I mentioned that, was, provider in the EC profession for over 30 years. I see her feeling a greater sense of stability, a greater sense of she's able to now kind of return to the kind of, I won't say normal style of business, but a little bit more stability within her day-to-day of her childcare business. Another great thing that this is able to address is that there's a need for also staffing into these EC providers, whether it's their family childcare homes or the childcare centers. It opens up that opportunity for capacity, and then the ability for us to be able to bring more ECE professionals into the system. And so it's going to have an immediate effect, and it's going to work for the accessibility of families, the most impoverished families that are trying to work, trying to go to school. Again, what Crystal Stairs and what we're trying to do in the early care and education system in California is bring families to self-sufficiency, right? It's not about a handout, but a hand up, right? How do we go from surviving to thriving in our communities? And that's what this bill will have an immediate effect on.
Let me answer it in a slightly different direction, which is, if this bill doesn't pass, right, and it will, I'm fairly sure it will, but if policies like these aren't pursued and implemented, the negative impacts are immediately clear. And so, if you consider, especially in this labor market, right, you've got childcare providers that do this out of love. These are, even where you've got a good stable business, very few people are getting wealthy by providing neighborhood-based childcare. Right. But they do it out of love, and California has again, a very rigorous but fairly well thought out system for certification, for staffing ratios. And if those people decide for whatever reason that this isn't viable, they can make more money right now taking hourly jobs, doing other things, but the cost to us as communities is really high. So we need to make sure that, and the other important thing is, once they're gone, they're really hard to replace. And so we need to make sure that there is continuity, but also, sustainability. And we need then, moving forward, to make sure that we recognize the contributions of these providers, and we make sure that there are paths to running a good business, but also, that there's good incentives to be in that industry, to be a certified child care professional, because, that's the only way that working families are going to have the economic foundation to move up and onward in California's economy.
Yeah, so this is clearly a very important thing that we're doing for our economy. So how can our viewers find out more about this bill and support it if they're in support of this?
Yeah, I come here representing Crystal Stairs, a nonprofit Los Angeles-based childcare agency, but I'm part of the ECE Coalition, which is about 40 membership of agencies similar to ours across the state of California, and one of our members is CAPA, which is the California Alternative Payment Association, and this bill is being championed by them, and really shout out to the CAPA team. What I want the viewers to do is view that website, CAPA Online. It's a really great website that shows what this bill is all about, information sheets, fact sheets on really what this bill will do and how critical it is to our early care and education system in California.
Yeah, and we'll include that in our show notes as well.
And let me just add, I'm here, I'm a co-author, but I'm actually standing in for Assemblymember Quirk-Silva. Reach out to her office. If you go to leginfo.com, I think, if you search California Legislative Information, there's a website that'll show you where a bill is and what process, what the hearings are coming up. And by all means, send an email to our office in support. It would be, I think, interesting and useful for anybody who is interested in this area. Call in, for the next hearing, and there's a public, input period at the end of every hearing, and you'll get to say who you are and your support for it. That actually is quite helpful, and I'd urge people to do it.
Awesome. So that way our viewers can support it if they want to. So we have kind of discussed this bill with Senator Newman. I want to discuss some of the other bills that you are working on. Specifically, everyone knows gas prices have just hiked up. People are paying upwards to $7 for a gallon of gas. You have been working on some bills, SB 942 in particular, and SB 1329. 942 is about transit ridership, and 1329 is clean transportation infrastructure. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how that would combat this problem and several other climate change issues?
Yeah, glad to. So one sort of addresses a need in the short term. The other is kind of a longer term set of goals. 942 is a bill that would provide the state the ability to. There are funds that come from the greenhouse gas funds from something called Cap and Trade that raises money every year to address climate change. And so some of those monies are eligible for use in transit systems to promote, reduced fare programs for students, reduced fare programs, free fare programs for workers in areas. And because of the way the bill was, the legislation was originally written for that, entities like the Orange County Transportation Authority can only do those things on a pilot basis. Even if they work, it's very difficult to continue them and kind of have to start from scratch. So what this bill does is it allows for ongoing use of these monies so that as we learn what works, especially now during the pandemic for those workers who are most impacted, giving them access to free transit, giving students access to free and reduced transit, really important. So it just makes for a legislative or budgeting basis to keep doing that in ways that work. The other bill is actually 1329 is a bill that endeavors to help create a viable platform for hydrogen fuel vehicles. There's really two ways to fuel cars and trucks with zero emissions fuels. Batteries are one. The other, far less known, are hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. I drive one. And so the state has, as a matter of official policy, has kind of a neutral position on both. But we haven't really invested on the hydrogen side. And there's a whole sort of slice of California's drivers for whom battery electric cars they're not affordable yet, but even when they are, they're not necessarily good practical options, right? If you live in an apartment building, if you have a very irregular schedule, battery electric cars might be challenging, where hydrogen fuel cell cars could be, because you fuel them just like a gas car, just you'll be using gaseous hydrogen instead of petroleum-based products. And hydrogen produces no emissions, and California has always enjoyed kind of a leadership role in these development of these kinds of technologies. So that's what this bill does. It tries to make sure that as we develop these platforms, one doesn't get left behind, because we need both. We're going to need both to transition California's drivers to zero emissions vehicles as soon as possible. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, no problem. I actually asked for a personal reason too. I drive a Toyota Mirai. I have been doing it for almost a year.
And do you have the new one or the old one?
I have a used one, 2018.
So you have the Jetsons looking one, and I have the next version. And so you will and so you'll attest. It's a wonderful car, and it's also a big pain in the butt to get fuel for. So this is the problem, right? And so you've got 30 million cars in California, give or take, and there's 6,000 gas stations. There's about 48,000 gas nozzles, if you think of it that way. There's only 53 hydrogen stations right now. There's 13,000 cars, but that could grow very quickly. But we have this chicken egg problem.
Right.
Need more stations for people to want the car. You need more cars for the stations to want to invest. That's the problem that my bill is trying to address. So I knew there was a reason why you were so smart about this. Yeah.
Very specific, because it comes from 1 year of experience trying to fuel this car.
And so I'm surprised we haven't met at one of the local stations as we've all frustratingly waited for systems to come back online or for the fuel to be refilled.
What's the longest time you waited for refueling your car?
I've had times where I've been stuck at the station waiting for somebody to come refill it because I did not have enough range left to get to a neighboring station. Where I think 2 hours. I mean, you can get to know a lot of people in 2 hours, right? Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, I've also, I think, waited upwards to 2 hours.
I've actually met people where there's a station in Placentia where a guy said to me, like, what's the deal? I said, I don't know. And he said, well, I live in Norco and I only have 6 miles of range left. And he's like, I'm stuck here. So, I don't know how long he was there, but I because I've gotten so involved in this, I have the phone numbers for most of the companies that provide fuel. So I called the guy directly. And they said they were going to send somebody out faster. But it's, the thing that I remind people is, this is a wonderful technology, but we have to make sure that we allow the markets to kind of invest and develop. And there was probably a time in like 1907 when people had all these cool horseless carriages, and they had to figure out how to get refined petroleum into them. And we've got that's at the same point of development, but the state in this case California has to play a role in making sure that all of the market participants have incentives to do it. Because if we can do that, hydrogen will cost less fairly soon than gasoline, and if you can get to that point, then it starts to really get exciting, because then people have not only a kind of a moral reason to address climate change, they've got a practical incentive to do it, and that's exactly how markets are supposed to work.
I think as a student, somebody who works part-time, I already have a really good practical reason for it too, along with the moral reason, because we got the free gas fueling card from the state, as well as the incentive when I was leasing the car out. This was the best option for me as somebody who doesn't have that stable income. I don't have kids, but I do need to, get back and forth. So when the gas prices were hiking up and everyone was going crazy, I'm like, I don't know what you guys are talking about, but I do wait in line quite a long time.
Although I will say, so everybody who's bought one of these cars, you get, as part of the incentives, you get a preloaded debit card that pays, probably for your fuel for 3 years, right? So there's a price on the pump, but you generally don't have to pay it. But it's the equivalent of a lot more per gallon of gas if you're paying that way. And so I've had times where I either couldn't find my debit card or didn't, really frustrating, it didn't work, and had to pay actual real money. But the trajectory is what it should be. It's coming down. And what we need is we need more drivers. We need more fueling stations. But we also need car manufacturers to really get excited about this prospective market and to invest in new models and greater range and those kinds of things. And so thank you for being part of this experiment. And so sometimes challenging, but all in, I think pretty encouraging. And so the viewers know, the state's official policy is by the year 2035. That no new car that actually uses internal combustion, that uses fossil fuels, will be sold in California. So to get to that point, we have to make really big progress really quickly. And so you can't sell enough electric vehicles. You probably can't convert enough drivers for just pure battery electric vehicles. So this hydrogen fuel cell technology is a necessary and really promising component of that.
Alrighty, so thank you so much for both of you for being here and explaining AB1649 as well as your other transportation bills. Did you want to add anything else at the end for the viewers who are watching in Fullerton?
Good.
Yeah, thank you. I just always one, appreciate the opportunity to be able to have this rich discussion at a very critical time in California. when it comes to our early care and education system. As we've talked about, it's a mass exodus of child care providers in the EC profession. There's a significant population disproportionately of Black women and brown women and communities of color, women of color that have not returned to the workforce because there's a lack of accessibility to high quality, affordable childcare. And so, there's no more critical time than right now to pass legislation like this and a significant amount of others that comes with long-term substantial funding. So I'm excited, like I said, about these type of conversations and excited to have champions in the legislature like Senator Newman and the Fullerton Observer for being able to broadcast and bring awareness to the need for equity in the early care and education system for our child care providers and our most hard in need and working families in California. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for being here.
And let me say, I'm grateful for Justin and Crystal Stairs and other partners in doing this work. I commend Assemblywoman Sharon Quirk-Silva for actually introducing the bill. I'm glad to support as a co-author. Also, as you can see, we're here at the Observer, and to Justin's point, commend the Observer. There aren't that many places, unfortunately, to have these kinds of conversations, and so we're very lucky in this area to have the Fullerton Observer. And I'm excited to see the Observer has entered the digital era. And I actually have another bill. I'm a joint author with Senator Steve Glazer of a bill that seeks to provide funds for independent local news gathering organizations that have been so devastated by changes in kind of the information economy. So love to come back and talk about that sometime. But nice to see you, Urooj. And so I guess this is the point where I have to commend not only you, but Professor Jody Balma.
Yes.
So everybody who works here is apparently a graduate in some fashion of one of Jody's courses. And so we are so lucky to have Jody and Fullerton College in this area as a pipeline for really smart, thoughtful people doing this kind of work. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, making time from your busy schedule. So we're on our episode here. If you need any more information, we'll have some links in the description. Thank you.